Velthari stood in the cold metal chamber deep inside the Quellian High Command. The blue lights above cast strange shadows on the walls. His thin gray skin felt the chill through his simple uniform. Around him, 5 other Quellian officers sat, at a curved table. Their large black eyes watched him without blinking. "Officer Velthari," said Commander Zeflos, the oldest among them. His voice was soft like all Quellians, but it carried the weight of authority. "You have been chosen for a special mission." Velthari nodded once. He had expected this call. For 3 cycles, he had studied alien species across the galaxy. He knew their languages, their customs, their ways of war. The High Command often sent him to observe other races before making contact. "Tell me about humans," Commander Zeflos continued. Velthari activated the datapad in his hands. Images appeared in the air above the table. A human soldier holding a primitive weapon. A human ship with crude metal plating. A human city with simple buildings reaching toward the sky. "Humans are a young species," Velthari began. "They discovered faster than light travel only 50 cycles ago. Their technology is basic. They still use chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. Their ships are slow and poorly armored. They should not pose a threat to anyone." "Should not," repeated another officer, Melkira. Her voice held a question. "Yes," Velthari said. "Yet they have been fighting the Braxton Horde for 3 full cycles. They have not been defeated." Silence filled the room. Every officer knew about the Braxton Horde. They were raiders and killers who swept across star systems like a plague. They had destroyed 12 civilizations in the past 10 cycles. No one fought the Braxton for long and survived. Commander Zeflos leaned forward. "This troubles the High Command. How do primitive humans resist the Braxton when advanced species fall within cycles?" Velthari looked at the images again. Human soldiers looked small compared to Braxton warriors. Human weapons seemed like toys next to Braxton plasma cannons. Human ships were tiny specks next to Braxton dreadnoughts. "I do not know," he admitted. "That is why you are going to find out," Commander Zeflos said. He touched a control and knew. Images appeared, star charts showing human territory, battle reports from the front lines, lists of ships and weapons. "The humans are preparing for a major battle," Melkira explained. "Intelligence reports say the Braxton are gathering their largest fleet yet. They plan to crush human resistance once and for all." Velthari studied the data. "Where will this battle happen?" "A human colony world called Kepler 442b, Commander," Zeflos replied. "It has mineral resources the humans need. They will not abandon it without a fight." Another officer, Quindar, spoke for the first time. "Your mission is simple, Velthari. Watch this battle. Record everything. Learn how humans fight. Discover their strengths and weaknesses." "Why?" Velthari asked. The officers exchanged looks. Commander Zeflos stood up slowly. His tall, thin frame cast a long shadow across the table. "The Braxton Horde grows stronger each cycle," he said. "Soon they may threaten Quellian space. We need allies. We need warriors who can fight them." Velthari understood. The Quellians were peaceful by nature. They had advanced technology, powerful shields, and fast ships. But they were not fighters. Their bodies were weak. Their minds preferred research to warfare. If the Braxton came for them, they would need help. "You believe humans could be such allies?" he asked. "That is what you will determine," Commander Zeflos replied. "If humans can truly resist the Braxton, perhaps we can learn from them, or perhaps we can use them." The words made Velthari uncomfortable, but he said nothing. He had his orders. Melkira activated another display. It showed a small, fast ship with advanced cloaking technology. "You will take the scout vessel Shadow Wing," she said. "It will keep you hidden while you observe. You must not interfere with the battle. You must not make contact with either side. Simply watch and record." Velthari nodded. "When do I leave?" "Immediately," Commander Zeflos said. "The Braxton fleet is already moving toward human space. You have perhaps 10 cycles to reach the colony and position yourself." The meeting ended quickly after that. Velthari gathered his equipment and made his way to the ship bay. The Shadow Wing was small but elegant, built for stealth and speed. Its dark hull would be invisible against the stars. Its sensors could detect a whisper from across a solar system. As he prepared the ship for launch, Velthari thought about humans. He had studied their history from intercepted broadcasts and stolen data files. They were a violent species, always fighting among themselves. They had wars over territory, resources, ideas, even skin color. They built weapons of incredible destruction and used them against their own kind. Yet they also showed strange behaviors that confused him. They risked their lives to save others, even strangers. They created art and music and stories. They explored dangerous places just to see what was there. They formed bonds with other species and treated them like family. Velthari could not understand them. No other species was so contradictory. Were they savage warriors or gentle philosophers? Were they selfish destroyers or selfless protectors? Perhaps the coming battle would provide answers. The Shadow Wing launched from the Quellian homeworld with a whisper of engines. As it entered hyperspace, Velthari settled in for the long journey. He reviewed his files on human military tactics, but found little useful information. Humans seemed to fight without clear patterns. They broke their own rules when it suited them. They won battles they should have lost, and lost battles they should have won. In 10 cycles, he would see them fight the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. He would learn their secrets. He would discover if they were worthy allies or useful tools. Velthari did not know that this mission would change everything he believed about war, about honor, and about what it truly meant to fight for something greater than yourself. He did not know that he would return home carrying knowledge too heavy for his conscience to bear. He only knew that he had a job to do, and he would do it well. The Shadow Wing dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Velthari activated the cloaking field and began his approach to the human colony world. Through his ship's sensors, he could see the planet spinning slowly in the light of its yellow star. It looked peaceful from this distance, but his instruments detected something else. Ships. Lots of ships. The human fleet was smaller than he expected. One heavy cruiser, the name Incheon painted on its hull in human letters. 6 destroyers with names like Busan and Daegu. A handful of smaller vessels that looked like they were built for cargo, not war. Against the coming Braxton horde, it seemed pitiful. Velthari guided his ship closer to the planet. The surface showed signs of rapid military preparation. Prefabricated structures dotted the landscape near the main colony. Gun positions carved into hillsides. Landing strips, expanded to handle more aircraft. The humans were getting ready for something big. He positioned the Shadow Wing in orbit behind one of the planet's small moons. From here, his advanced sensors could watch everything while staying hidden. Velthari settled into his observation chair and began recording. The first thing that caught his attention was a group of human soldiers near the main base. They sat in a circle on the ground, sharing food from small metal containers. Velthari zoomed in with his cameras. The soldiers looked young, even for humans. Their faces were smooth and unmarked by the scars of many battles. One of them, a male, the computer identified as Private Do-yun, was telling some kind of story. The others laughed at whatever he said. They seemed relaxed, almost happy. This confused Velthari. According to his data, the Braxton fleet would arrive within 2 cycles. These humans should be afraid. They should be preparing weapons or building defenses. Instead, they were sharing meals and telling jokes. He switched his sensors to another area. Here he found a group of female soldiers led by someone his computer tagged as Sergeant Nari. They were not eating or laughing. They stood in neat rows, facing a wall covered with photographs and small objects. Velthari increased magnification. The photographs showed human faces, young faces, old faces, male and female. Below each picture were human symbols that his translator decoded as names and dates. This was some kind of memorial. Sergeant Nari spoke to her soldiers in a quiet voice. Velthari's sensors picked up her words and translated them. "We remember those who came before," she said. "We remember Corporal Jinwoo, who died protecting the evacuation ships at Proxima Station. We remember Lieutenant Hyejin, who stayed at her post when the reactor went critical. We remember Private Seokjin, who gave his rations to wounded civilians even when he had not eaten for 3 days. The soldiers stood silently as she spoke each name. Some of them had tears on their faces. When Sergeant Nari finished, they all spoke together. We will not let them be forgotten. We will not let their sacrifice be meaningless. Velthari made notes in his observation log. The humans honored their dead, but this seemed inefficient. Dwelling on past losses could weaken morale. Before a battle, why remind soldiers of death when they were about to face it themselves? He moved his cameras to the shipyards above the planet. Human engineers worked on the fleet vessels, making repairs and modifications. What he saw there made him pause. The work was crude but clever. Human welders attached extra armor plates to ship hulls, but the plates came from destroyed Braxton vessels. Human technicians rewired weapon systems, combining their own technology with captured alien equipment. It was not elegant, but it looked effective. One engineer, a young woman his computer identified as Specialist Yunji, was doing something particularly interesting. She had removed a Braxton plasma rifle from a salvage pile and was taking it apart, piece by piece. As she worked, she explained each component to a group of other engineers. "See this focusing crystal," she said, holding up a small blue stone. "It channels the plasma into a beam. But if we modify the housing like this, we can increase the power output by 30%. Another engineer asked, "Will it be stable?" Yunji smiled. "Probably. We will find out when we test it." Velthari made more notes. Humans seemed willing to take risks with untested technology. This could be an advantage or a fatal weakness depending on the results. He spent the next several hours watching different groups of humans. Pilots practiced flying patterns in small fighter craft. Ground troops ran training exercises with weapons that seemed too heavy for their small bodies. Medical personnel prepared field hospitals with equipment that looked primitive but functional. What struck him most was how they interacted with each other. Humans touched frequently, hands on shoulders, brief embraces, friendly contact that served no obvious military purpose. Officers ate the same food as common soldiers. Veterans helped newcomers learn their duties without being ordered to do so. In one scene that particularly puzzled him, Velthari watched a human commander named Captain Jiho visiting wounded soldiers in the medical bay. The captain sat beside each bed and talked quietly with the injured men and women. He listened to their concerns about the coming battle. He promised to write letters to their families if they did not survive. This made no sense to Velthari. A commander's time was valuable. It should be spent on planning and preparation, not comforting soldiers who were already out of the fight. Yet the wounded humans seemed stronger after speaking with their captain. Their vital signs improved. Some even asked to return to duty. As the first day of observation ended, Velthari reviewed his recordings. He had expected to see efficient military preparation. Instead, he saw something he could not quite understand. The humans acted like they cared about each other as individuals, not just as tools of war. He updated his mission log with a new entry. Human behavior remains illogical. They waste time on emotional connections that serve no tactical purpose. They take unnecessary risks with experimental technology. They dwell on past losses instead of focusing on future victory. However, these behaviors seem to strengthen rather than weaken their fighting spirit. Further observation required to understand this contradiction. Outside his ship, the stars continued to turn. Somewhere in the darkness, the Braxton fleet was coming. Soon, Velthari would see if human emotion was strength or weakness when the real fighting began. The alarm woke Velthari from his rest cycle. His ship's sensors had detected massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. The Braxton horde had arrived. Through his view screen, Velthari watched the enemy fleet emerge from hyperspace, like a swarm of angry insects. 3 massive dreadnoughts led the formation, each one larger than the entire human fleet combined. Behind them came 50 smaller vessels, cruisers, destroyers, and assault ships bristling with weapons. The Braxton ships were dark and angular, built for one purpose: destruction. Their hulls were covered in spikes and weapon ports. Energy fields crackled around their engines. Even through his sensors, Velthari could feel the menace radiating from the alien fleet. He quickly calculated the odds. The Braxton fleet outmassed the human defenders by more than 10 to 1. Their weapons were more advanced. Their shields were stronger. Their armor was thicker. By every measure that mattered, the humans should surrender immediately. Instead, Admiral Hyan's voice came across all communication channels. "This is Admiral Hyan of the Human Defense Fleet. You have entered human space without permission. Turn around and leave now, or we will defend ourselves." The response from the Braxton came minutes later. It was broadcast on all frequencies, so everyone could hear it. The voice was deep and harsh, speaking accented human words. "Weak humans. You have fought us for 3 cycles and learned nothing. Today your resistance ends. Surrender now and we will kill you quickly. Resist, and we will make your deaths slow and painful." Velthari expected Admiral Hyan to at least consider the offer. Any rational commander would try to negotiate, to buy time, to find some way to avoid a hopeless battle. Instead, the Admiral's reply was short and simple. "Come and take it." The human fleet began moving toward the enemy. Not away from them, toward them. Velthari adjusted his sensors to record everything. This would be over quickly, but the High Command would want to see exactly how humans fought before they died. The battle began with long-range missile exchanges. The Braxton launched clouds of plasma torpedoes that lit up space like deadly fireworks. The human ships responded with primitive kinetic missiles that seemed pathetic by comparison. But something unexpected happened. The human missiles were not aimed at the Braxton ships. They were aimed at empty space between the 2 fleets. When they exploded, they created fields of metal fragments and electromagnetic interference that disrupted the Braxton targeting systems. The plasma torpedoes missed their targets by wide margins. The Braxton had to recalibrate their weapons, giving the humans precious time to close the distance. As the fleets drew closer, Velthari focused his attention on the surface of Kepler 442b. The Braxton were not just here for a space battle. They had come to invade the planet and claim its resources. Landing craft began dropping from the enemy ships toward the human colony. On the ground, Captain Jiho was ready for them. His Marines had positioned themselves in defensive lines around the main base. But these were not the static defenses that most species used. The humans had created something different. Private Do-hyun and his squad were positioned in a forward bunker when the first Braxton troops landed nearby. The enemy soldiers were huge creatures twice the size of humans, with thick armor and powerful plasma weapons. They advanced on the human position with confidence. The humans let them come close, very close. Then Do-hyun triggered a hidden explosive charge that collapsed part of a hillside onto the advancing Braxton. While the enemies were stunned and confused, his squad opened fire with their kinetic weapons. The Braxton armor was designed to stop plasma bolts and energy beams. It was not designed to stop high-velocity metal bullets. The human weapons punched through the alien armor like it was paper. But the victory was short-lived. More Braxton landed and began advancing from multiple directions. Do-hyun's position was soon surrounded. Velthari expected the humans to retreat or surrender. Instead, he watched something that made no sense. Private Kiwan's bunker was being overrun by Braxton warriors. The logical response would be to abandon the position and fall back to the next defensive line. Instead, 2 other humans, Young-ho and Min-jae, left their safe positions and fought their way through enemy fire to reach their trapped comrade. They should have died. The odds against them were impossible, but somehow they reached Kiwan's bunker, grabbed their wounded friend and fought their way back to safety. 3 humans against dozens of Braxton, and they succeeded. Velthari checked his recordings to make sure he had captured everything correctly. The math did not work. The tactics made no sense. Yet it had happened. In space, the battle was going no better for the humans. The cruiser Incheon had taken heavy damage from Braxton Dreadnought fire. Its engines were failing and its weapons were barely functional. Admiral Hyan should have ordered a retreat. Instead, He positioned his dying ship between the Braxton fleet and a group of civilian evacuation shuttles that were fleeing the planet. The Incheon could not win a fight against 3 dreadnoughts, but it could buy time for the civilians to escape. "All hands, this is the Admiral." Hyun's voice came over the communication channels. "We may not be the strongest fleet in the galaxy. We may not have the best weapons or the thickest armor, but we have something the enemy does not understand. We fight for each other. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Today we show them what that means." The Incheon opened fire with everything it had left. Its missiles and projectile cannons were primitive compared to Braxton weapons, but they were aimed with desperate precision. The human ship could not destroy the dreadnoughts, but it could hurt them. More importantly, it refused to die quickly. Every time the Braxton thought they had finished off the human cruiser, it found some reserve of power and continued fighting. The evacuation shuttles gained precious time to reach the hyperspace jump point. Velthari began to understand something troubling. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to protect something else. Their tactics only made sense if victory was less important than keeping others safe. This was not how wars were supposed to work. This was not how any rational species behaved. Yet somehow, it was working. The battle had been raging for 6 hours when Velthari witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. A young human medic named Salman was moving across an open battlefield under heavy enemy fire. She was not retreating. She was not seeking cover. She was running toward a wounded soldier who had fallen between the human and Braxton lines. Velthari focused his sensors on her. Soman was small even by human standards. Her medical kit bounced on her back as she ran. Plasma bolts from Braxton. Weapons scorched the ground around her feet. Any one of them could have killed her instantly. Captain Jiho's voice crackled over her communication device. "Soman, get back here. That's an order. The area is too dangerous." "Negative, sir," she replied without slowing down. "Taewon is still alive. I can save him." "That's not your call to make," the captain shouted. "Return to base immediately, Soman." Reached the wounded soldier and dropped to her knees beside him. Private Taewon had taken a plasma bolt to his chest. His armor was melted, and his breathing was shallow. Any rational medic would have declared him beyond help. Instead, Soman began emergency treatment right there in the middle of the battlefield. She injected stimulants to keep his heart beating. She sealed his wounds with surgical foam. She called for an extraction team while Braxton weapons fire continued to rain down around them. "I'm not leaving him," she said into her communicator. "Send help or don't, but I'm not leaving him." Velthari made notes in his observation log. The medic's behavior was completely illogical. She was risking her own life and potentially the lives of any rescue team for one wounded soldier. The tactical value of saving Private Taewon could not possibly justify the risk. Yet as he watched, other humans began responding to Soman's call. A fire team led by Corporal Gyeongsu laid down covering fire to protect the medic. 2 other soldiers, with a stretcher, began making their way toward her position. They were all risking their lives for one wounded comrade. The rescue succeeded. Against all odds, they got Taewon back to the medical station alive. Velthari saw Soman working on him there, her hands steady despite what she had just been through. The wounded soldier would survive, but the cost was high. Corporal Gyeongsu had been wounded providing cover fire. One of the stretcher bearers had been killed by Braxton shrapnel. 3 casualties to save 1 life. The math made no sense, except that it did make sense to the humans. Velthari could see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. They were not calculating costs and benefits. They were saving one of their own because that was what they did. It was not a tactical decision. It was something deeper. His attention was pulled to another part of the battlefield where something even more troubling was happening. Engineer Tae-hyun was trapped in a damaged bunker that was about to collapse. His team was trying to evacuate, but the blast doors were failing. Without power to the door controls, they would all be trapped inside when the structure fell. Tae-hyun made a decision that Velthari could not comprehend. Instead of trying to escape with his team, he stayed behind to manually hold the blast doors open. It required someone to remain in the most dangerous part of the bunker, directly in the path of falling debris. "Go," he told his team over the communication system. "Get out now while you can." "We're not leaving you," replied Engineer Minji. "Yes, you are," Taehyun said firmly. "My daughter needs you all to help rebuild after this war is over. She doesn't need all of us to die here today." Velthari watched as the other engineers reluctantly evacuated through the manually held doors. Taehyun remained at his post, using his own body to keep the heavy doors from closing. When the last person was clear, he let go. The blast doors slammed shut just as the bunker collapsed. Taehyun was gone, but his team was safe. The most disturbing incident came an hour later. Commander Jiwon was piloting a damaged fighter above the battlefield. Her ship had lost most of its weapons and half of its engine power. She should have returned to base for repairs. Instead, she identified a critical target. One of the Braxton dreadnoughts had a massive weapon array that was devastating. The human ground forces. If someone could disable that array, it would save hundreds of lives on the surface. The weapon array was heavily shielded and protected by point defense systems. No missile could get through. No projectile weapon could penetrate its armor. There was only one way to destroy it. Commander Jiwon aimed her crippled fighter directly at the target. "Control, this is Jiwon," she said over the communication channel. "I'm making a final run on Dreadnought 1's main weapons." "Negative, Jiwon," came Admiral Hyon's voice. "Return to base immediately." "Can't do that, sir. Someone has to take out those guns, and I'm the only one in position." Velthari realized what she was planning. It was not a weapons run, it was a suicide attack. "Jiwon, that's not necessary," the Admiral protested. "We can find another way." "No time, sir. They're about to fire on the civilian shelters." Commander Jiwon's fighter accelerated toward the Braxton dreadnought. The enemy ship's defensive weapons opened fire, but the human pilot was skilled. She dodged between the energy bolts, using her ship's small size and desperate speed to avoid destruction. As her fighter closed the final distance, Jiwon spoke her last words over the communication channel. "For those who come after us." The impact was brilliant and brief. Commander Jiwon's fighter struck the weapon array at full speed and exploded in a ball of fire. The Braxton dreadnought's main guns went dark. On the ground, hundreds of human civilians in the emergency shelters continued to breathe because one pilot chose to die for them. Velthari found himself staring at his sensor readings without really seeing them. In his long career studying alien species, he had observed many wars and many acts of courage. But this was different. The humans were not just brave. They were doing something that went against every survival instinct that evolution should have given them. They were choosing the lives of others over their own lives, not for strategic reasons, not for tactical advantage, simply because it was what they believed was right. His observation log remained empty for several minutes. Velthari could not find words to describe what he was witnessing. How do you explain a species that fights most fiercely when they are fighting for others instead of themselves? Finally, he began to type. Human behavior continues to defy logical analysis. Individual humans consistently choose actions that decrease their personal survival probability in order to increase the survival probability of other humans. This appears to be instinctual rather than learned behavior. The tactical implications are unclear but potentially significant. He paused, then added a note that he would later regret sharing with his superiors. Recommend further study of this phenomenon. A species that values collective survival over individual survival may prove useful in future military applications. Something was changing on the battlefield, and it took Velthari time to understand what he was seeing. The Braxton forces, who had been advancing steadily for hours, were beginning to slow down. Their attacks were becoming less coordinated. Some units were actually pulling back from positions they had already captured. This made no sense. The Braxton held every advantage. They had more ships, better weapons, and superior numbers. They should be pressing their attack until the humans were completely defeated. Instead, they seemed to be losing their will to fight. Velthari focused, his sensors on a Braxton assault unit that had surrounded a small group of human Marines. The aliens should have finished off the trapped humans quickly and moved on to the next target. Instead, they seemed hesitant to close in for the final attack. The reason became clear when Sergeant Nari's voice came over the communication channels. "This is Sergeant Nari to all Braxton forces in Sector 7. You have us surrounded, but you have not defeated us. We are not surrendering. We are not retreating. If you want this position, you will have to take it from our dead hands." Her squad was down to 5 Marines with limited ammunition and no hope of reinforcement. By every military standard, they should have been requesting terms for surrender. Instead, they were demanding more ammunition. "Base, this is Nari. We need more rounds. For the heavy gun." "Negative, Sergeant," came Captain Jiho's reply. "You're cut off. No way to get supplies to your position." "Then we'll use what we have," she replied calmly. "Tell my family I died doing something worthwhile." The Braxton Assault Unit had been listening to these communications. Velthari could see them through his sensors, standing just outside the human position. They were not attacking. They were waiting. One of the Braxton commanders spoke to his troops in their own language. Velthari's translator decoded the words, "They will not surrender. They will fight until they are all dead." Another Braxton warrior responded, "So we kill them? That is what we do." "Yes," the commander said, but his voice held uncertainty. "That is what we do." But they did not attack. For the first time in their military history, the Braxton horde was hesitating in the face of enemy resistance. Velthari began to understand the psychological impact of human behavior. The Braxton were accustomed to enemies who fought to win. When those enemies realized they could not win, they surrendered or fled. This was logical behavior that the Braxton understood and respected. But humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to protect. And they would continue fighting as long as there was something left to protect, regardless of whether victory was possible. This created a problem that the Braxton had never encountered before. How do you defeat an enemy who refuses to acknowledge defeat? The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Hyan's voice came over all communication channels, speaking not just to human forces, but to the Braxton as well. "Attention, Braxton. Fleet. You came here expecting an easy victory over a primitive species. You thought we would break and run when faced with superior force. You were wrong." Velthari could see the Braxton dreadnoughts through his sensors. They had stopped firing. Someone on their command bridge was listening. "We have been fighting you for 3 cycles," Admiral Hyan continued. "In that time, you have learned something about humans that you did not expect to learn. We do not fight for conquest. We do not fight for glory. We fight for each other." The Admiral paused, then spoke words that would be remembered long after the battle was over. "You cannot defeat us because we are not trying to defeat you. We are trying to save each other. And we will never stop trying to save each other." As if summoned by the Admiral's words, new contacts appeared on Velthari's sensors. Ships were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Human ships, but not the primitive vessels he had observed before. These ships were different, sleeker, more advanced, built with technology that seemed to blend human engineering with equipment from a dozen other species. At their head was a massive vessel that his computer identified as the carrier Sol. The new fleet was 3 times larger than the original human defenders. "This is Admiral Seojin of the 2nd Human Fleet," came a new voice over the communications. "We received your call for assistance, Hyun. Sorry we're late to the party." Velthari quickly analyzed the new arrivals. Where had these ships come from? His intelligence reports had shown no evidence of such a large human fleet. The answer came as he studied the ship designs more closely. These vessels had been built recently, very recently. The humans had been using the time during this battle to construct reinforcements. More than that, they had been incorporating technology captured from previous Braxton defeats. The plasma weapons on the new human ships were clearly based on Braxton designs, but they had been modified with human engineering principles. The shields used Braxton energy patterns but with human power distribution systems. It was a hybrid technology that combined the best of both species. But the most impressive thing was not the technology. It was the tactics. The 2nd Human Fleet did not attack the Braxton ships directly. Instead, they began rescuing the survivors from damaged human vessels. They evacuated wounded soldiers from the planet's surface. They established safe corridors for civilian refugees. Even with reinforcements, the humans were not focused on destroying their enemies. They were focused on saving their people. This had a devastating effect on Braxton morale. The alien warriors had come here to crush human resistance. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that grew stronger with every act of sacrifice. Every human who died to save others inspired 10 more humans to fight harder. Private Do-hyun, who had been fighting for 12 hours straight, found a moment to speak with his squad. "You know what the difference is between us and them," he said, reloading his weapon with ammunition scavenged from destroyed Braxton equipment. "They fight because they are ordered to fight. We fight because we choose to fight." His squad mate, Private Changmin, nodded. "They fight for their leaders. We fight for each other. And that," said Do-hyun, "is why they are going to lose." As if to prove his point, several Braxton units began withdrawing from their forward positions. They were not retreating in panic. They were conducting an orderly withdrawal, but they were definitely pulling back. Velthari could hardly believe what his sensors were showing him. The mighty Braxton horde, conquerors of a dozen civilizations, were being forced to retreat by a supposedly primitive human force. The humans began pursuing them, not with the desperate aggression of a cornered animal, but with the calm determination of hunters who knew their prey was wounded. Admiral Hyon's damaged cruiser, which should have been destroyed hours ago, was somehow still fighting. Admiral Seojin's fresh fleet was cutting off Braxton escape routes. On the ground, Captain Jiho's Marines were advancing on enemy positions that had been considered impregnable. For the first time since arriving in the system, Velthari began to believe that the humans might actually win this battle. More importantly, he began to understand why they were winning. It was not because of superior technology or better tactics. It was because they had turned their greatest apparent weakness into their greatest strength. The humans cared about each other, and that caring made them unstoppable. The last Braxton ship disappeared into hyperspace 18 hours after the battle began. For the first time in anyone's memory, the Braxton horde had been completely defeated, not just repelled, not just driven off, but utterly broken as a fighting force. Velthari sat in his hidden ship, staring at sensor readings that showed the impossible. The human fleet was not pursuing their defeated enemies. They were not claiming victory or celebrating conquest. They were doing something else entirely. The humans were saving lives. Every ship in the human fleet had been converted into a rescue vessel. They pulled survivors from the wreckage of both human and Braxton ships. They treated wounded enemies with the same care they gave to their own soldiers. They offered medical aid to anyone who needed it, regardless of which side they had fought. And Admiral Hyun's damaged cruiser had become a floating hospital. Admiral Seojin's fresh fleet was distributing food and supplies to refugees. On the planet's surface, Captain Jiho's Marines were helping to rebuild destroyed civilian shelters. Velthari focused his sensors on the main human base where a memorial ceremony was taking place. The humans were honoring their dead, but they were also honoring something else. They were celebrating the lives that had been saved. Captain Jiho stood before a crowd of soldiers and civilians. In his hands he held a letter written on simple paper. His voice was steady as he spoke. "This letter is from Engineer Tae-hyun to his daughter Minju. He wrote it before the battle, knowing he might not survive. He wanted her to know why he fought." The old captain began to read. "My dear daughter, if you are hearing this letter, it means I did not come home from the war. I want you to understand why I chose to stay and fight instead of running away to safety with you." The crowd was silent. Even through his alien sensors, Velthari could feel the weight of the moment. "I did not fight because I wanted to kill our enemies. I fought because I wanted you to grow up in a universe where people like you can live in peace. I fought so that other children would have fathers who come home. I fought so that other families would not have to write letters like this one." Captain Jiho paused, his own voice becoming emotional. "I fought because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. Today that someone was me. Tomorrow it might be you. But there will always be someone because that is what humans do. We protect each other. The letter continued. Do not be sad that I am gone. Be proud that I was part of something larger than myself. Be proud that your father helped save a world full of people he never met. Be proud that when the universe needed someone to stand up for what was right, humans answered that call. When the captain finished reading, the crowd was silent for a long moment. Then they began to speak together. The same words Velthari had heard Sergeant Nari's unit say days earlier. We will not let them be forgotten. We will not let their sacrifice be meaningless. But this time, Velthari understood what the words really meant. The humans were not just honoring their dead. They were making a promise to continue the work their fallen comrades had started. They were pledging to keep protecting others, no matter the cost. As the ceremony ended, Velthari began preparing his final report to the Quellian High Command. He had been ordered to assess human military capabilities and determine whether they would make useful allies. Now he understood the true horror of his mission. The Quellian Empire had not sent him to evaluate potential partners. They had sent him to evaluate potential weapons. His superiors wanted to know if humans could be used as soldiers in Quellian wars. They wanted to turn humanity's greatest strength into a tool for alien purposes. Velthari thought about Commander G1 flying her damaged fighter into the Braxton weapon array, dying so that civilians she had never met could live. He thought about Medic Soman running through enemy fire to save a wounded soldier. He thought about Engineer Taehyun holding blast doors open with his own hands so his team could escape. These humans had not died for conquest or glory. They had died for love. Love of their families, love of their friends, love of people they would never meet but chose to protect anyway, and his government wanted to use that love as a weapon. Velthari began typing his report, but not the one his superiors expected. To the High Command of the Quellian Empire, I have completed my observation of human military capabilities. My recommendation is immediate cessation of all contact with this species. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Humans are not weapons that can be aimed at our enemies. They are not tools that can be used for our purposes. They are something far more dangerous and far more valuable than we understood. Humans are guardians. They do not fight for conquest or territory or resources. They fight for each other. They fight for principles. They fight for beings they have never met simply because those beings need protection. This makes them the most formidable military force in the galaxy, but not in the way we expected. Any species that makes an enemy of humanity will face not just superior tactics or advanced weapons. They will face the wrath of a people who will never stop fighting for what they believe is right. Velthari stopped typing and looked out at the human fleet. He thought about the Braxton horde, now scattered and broken, fleeing across the galaxy with the knowledge that they had met something they could not defeat. He thought about his own people, safe in their advanced cities, protected by shields and weapons and the vast distances between stars. They thought they were the masters of the galaxy because they had the best technology. They were wrong. The real masters of the galaxy were the species who would fight and die for each other without being ordered to do so. The real power in the universe belonged to those who chose love over fear, sacrifice over safety, protection over conquest. Velthari finished his report with words that would end his career and change the course of galactic history. Humanity cannot be used as a weapon because they are not a weapon. They are a force of nature. They are evolution's answer to the question of what happens when intelligence is combined with compassion. They are what we could have become if we had chosen differently. My recommendation is that the Quellian Empire should not attempt to use humanity as allies in our wars. Instead, we should learn from them what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves. We should discover what they already know, that the strongest species in the universe is not the one with the best weapons, but the one willing to sacrifice everything to protect others. I hereby resign my commission and request asylum among the humans. I have seen what true strength looks like and I want to be part of it. Velthari sent the report and then deleted all of his mission files. He powered down his ship's cloaking device and sent a message to Admiral Hyan requesting permission to land. The response came quickly. Permission granted. Welcome to the family. As his ship descended toward the human base, Velthari felt something he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he was part of something larger than himself. He was joining the Guardians. The regret mentioned in his original mission title was not regret at witnessing human violence. It was regret at understanding what his own species had planned to do with humanity's noble nature. It was regret at nearly becoming part of a system that would have used love as a weapon. But that regret had led him to something better. It had led him home.